In the shadowy corridors of power, where the fate of nations is decided far from the prying eyes of the public, there are moments in history that have been carefully hidden from the world. These are the places where secrets are born, where alliances are forged in silence, and where the most profound decisions that shape the course of humanity are made in the dark. It is within these secretive chambers that the line between reality and conspiracy often blurs, and where the unimaginable becomes possible. One such moment, buried deep in classified archives and whispered among the few who dare to speak of it, is the story of how the Soviet Union signed a secret treaty with gray aliens in 1942. This tale, shrouded in mystery and wrapped in layers of disinformation, reveals a hidden chapter of World War II that, if true, could alter our understanding of global history and humanity's place in the cosmos. It is a story that challenges the very fabric of what we know about the past and forces us to question the narrative that has been handed down to us through the annals of history. For those who have stumbled upon fragments of this tale, it is a narrative that is both fascinating and terrifying, a reminder that the truth is often stranger than fiction. The implications of such a treaty are staggering, suggesting that the great powers of the world may not only be in conflict with one another, but may also be engaged in covert dealings with forces beyond our world. The existence of this treaty, if it indeed exists, would not only redefine our understanding of World War II, but also raise profound questions about the nature of power, sovereignty, and the human race's role in a larger, cosmic scheme. The world on the brink. To fully grasp the significance of this supposed treaty, one must first understand the context in which it was allegedly signed. In 1942, the world was in turmoil. World War II had reached its zenith, with Axis and Allied forces locked in brutal conflict across Europe, Africa, and the Pacific. The entire globe was embroiled in a struggle for survival, with the future of humanity hanging in the balance. The war had become a battle of ideologies, with democracy and totalitarianism clashing in a fight to the death. The Soviet Union, under the leadership of Joseph Stalin, was reeling from the devastating impact of Operation Barbarossa, the Nazi invasion that had begun in June 1941. The German Blitzkrieg had torn through Soviet defenses, pushing deep into Soviet territory and leaving destruction in its wake. The Red Army, though vast and resilient, was struggling to hold back the German onslaught. The cities of the Soviet Union, from Leningrad to Stalingrad, were under siege, and the Soviet people were enduring unimaginable hardships as their cities burned and their soldiers died by the millions. Amid this backdrop of desperation and determination, the Soviet leadership was exploring every possible avenue to turn the tide of the war. The alliance with the Western powers, forged out of necessity rather than trust, was crucial but fraught with tension. Stalin, a man known for his paranoia and ruthlessness, understood that the fate of the Soviet Union, and indeed the world, depended on finding a way to overcome the formidable Nazi war machine. The pressure on the Soviet leadership was immense, and the stakes had never been higher. It was in this context of global chaos and existential threat that a series of extraordinary and inexplicable events began to unfold. These events, though seemingly isolated and unrelated at first, would soon converge into a singular narrative that would lead the Soviet Union down a path of secrecy and conspiracy that would span decades. This path would take the Soviets into the unknown, into realms of possibility that were beyond the comprehension of even the most seasoned military strategists and political leaders. Strange occurrences in the Soviet skies. The first signs that something unusual was happening came in the form of strange lights and unidentified flying objects, UFOs, reported by Soviet military personnel. These sightings were not just isolated incidents. They occurred with alarming frequency and in various locations across the vast expanse of the Soviet Union. The reports described phenomena that defied conventional explanation: glowing orbs that danced in the night sky, disc-shaped craft that moved with incredible speed and agility, and lights that would appear and disappear without a trace. Initially, these sightings were dismissed as German reconnaissance aircraft or experimental weapons. The Soviet military, always on high alert for any sign of enemy activity, assumed that these were new technologies being tested by the Nazis. However, as the reports grew more frequent and the descriptions more detailed, it became clear that something far more extraordinary was taking place. These objects did not behave like any known aircraft. They exhibited flight characteristics that defied the laws of physics, and they were immune to the Soviet Union's most advanced detection and interception technologies. Soviet pilots and ground troops reported seeing objects in the sky that could accelerate at incredible speeds, make sharp turns at impossible angles, and disappear from sight in an instant. These objects, often described as glowing or metallic, were unlike anything in the Soviet arsenal or that of their enemies. The sightings were not limited to one area. They occurred across a wide range of locations, from the Western Front near Germany to the remote regions of Siberia. Despite their best efforts, the Soviet military could not identify these craft, let alone intercept or engage them. At first, the sightings were kept secret, confined to the highest levels of the Soviet military command. Stalin himself was briefed on the situation, and while he was initially skeptical, believing it could be a form of psychological warfare or a distraction by the Germans, the sheer volume and consistency of the reports convinced him that something significant was occurring. The Soviet leader, known for his ruthless pragmatism and deep suspicion of anything outside his control, ordered the formation of a special task force to investigate the phenomenon. This task force, comprised of the most trusted and skilled officers, scientists, and intelligence agents, was given unlimited resources and the authority to operate in complete secrecy. The encounter. As the task force began its work, gathering intelligence and analyzing reports, something unprecedented occurred: an actual encounter with one of these mysterious craft. According to classified Soviet documents that have since been leaked or uncovered by researchers, in the late summer of 1942, a Soviet patrol in the remote wilderness of Siberia stumbled upon a downed UFO. The craft, largely intact, had apparently crash-landed after some sort of malfunction. This was not just a sighting, it was physical evidence of something extraordinary. The patrol, initially shocked and terrified by their discovery, quickly radioed their superiors. The soldiers, hardened by the brutal realities of war, were not easily frightened. But what they had encountered was beyond anything they had ever experienced. The craft was massive, with a smooth, metallic surface that reflected the surrounding forest. It was shaped like a disc, with no visible markings or insignias, no sign that it belonged to any known nation or military force. Within hours, a specialized team of Soviet scientists, engineers, and military personnel was dispatched to secure the site. This team was handpicked from the elite of the Soviet Union's scientific and military community, individuals who had proven their loyalty and capability time and again. The operation to secure the crash site was carried out under the strictest secrecy. The site was cordoned off and the entire area was declared a restricted zone. Even within the Soviet military, only a select few were aware of what was happening. What they found at the crash site would change the course of history. The craft, made of a material that was unlike anything the Soviets had ever encountered, was emitting a faint, pulsing light. The surface of the craft was cool to the touch, and it seemed to be constructed from a single, unbroken piece of material, an engineering marvel that defied the known limits of technology. The team approached cautiously, fearing the possibility of radiation or other unknown dangers. They were equipped with the most advanced detection equipment available at the time, but none of it could make sense of what they were dealing with. As they investigated, they discovered that the craft was not entirely empty. Inside, they found beings, small, gray-skinned, with large heads and almond-shaped eyes, who appeared to be injured but alive. These beings were unlike any creature known to science. They had a humanoid form, but their proportions were different, their skin a strange, almost translucent gray, and their eyes large and black, devoid of pupils or whites. These beings, later known as the Greys, were taken into custody and transported to a secret facility deep within the Soviet Union. The decision to transport the beings rather than leave them at the crash site was made quickly. Stalin wanted to control every aspect of the situation. The craft was also carefully dismantled and transported piece by piece to be studied by Soviet scientists. The dismantling process took days, and the entire operation was conducted with military precision, ensuring that not a single piece of evidence was left behind. Stalin himself was informed of the discovery, and he ordered that the utmost secrecy be maintained. The Soviets had stumbled upon something far beyond their understanding, and Stalin was determined to exploit it for the benefit of the Soviet state. He recognized the potential power that could be harnessed from this discovery, but he also understood the dangers. This was not just an opportunity, it was a challenge, a test of the Soviet Union's ability to control and utilize forces that were, quite literally, out of this world. So the first contact, the captured Greys, though initially unresponsive, eventually began to communicate with their Soviet captors. At first, the communication was tentative and difficult. The Greys appeared to have no vocal cords, yet they managed to convey thoughts and ideas through a combination of telepathic and rudimentary verbal communication. This telepathy was not like anything the Soviets had ever encountered. It was direct, clear, and unambiguous, bypassing language barriers and conveying complex ideas in an instant. The Greys conveyed that they had come to Earth with peaceful intentions, but that their craft had malfunctioned, leading to the crash. They explained that they were part of a larger group that had been observing Earth for some time, particularly interested in the technological and societal developments of humanity. The Greys were not invaders. They were explorers, scientists, and diplomats, sent to study humanity and establish contact. The Greys offered something that Stalin could hardly refuse: advanced technology. They proposed a deal, a secret treaty between their species and the Soviet Union. In exchange for the safe return of their surviving crew members and the promise of secrecy, the Greys would provide the Soviets with knowledge and technology far beyond anything available on Earth. This technology, they assured, could be used to turn the tide of the war and secure the Soviet Union's dominance on the global stage. Stalin, ever the pragmatist, saw the potential in such an alliance. Despite his deep-seated distrust of anything that was not firmly within his control, he understood that the technology the Greys were offering could be the key to defeating the Nazis and ensuring the Soviet Union's place as a superpower in the post-war world. After consulting with his closest advisors, Stalin agreed to the terms proposed by the Greys. This was not a decision made lightly. It was a calculated risk, one that could have profound consequences for the Soviet Union and the world. The Greys demonstrated some of their technology to the Soviet scientists, small devices that could generate immense amounts of energy, materials that were virtually indestructible, and propulsion systems that defied the laws of physics. The Soviet scientists were astounded by what they saw. This was not just advanced technology. It was a glimpse into a future that was centuries ahead of anything humanity had achieved. The possibilities were limitless, and the potential applications were immediately clear. Weapons, energy, transportation, all could be revolutionized by what the Greys had to offer. The Secret Treaty. The treaty, signed in the utmost secrecy, outlined several key agreements. The Greys would provide the Soviets with advanced technology, including propulsion systems, energy weapons, and material science. In return, the Soviets would ensure the safe return of the Grey crew members and maintain strict confidentiality about the existence of the Greys and their technology. This treaty was not just a political agreement. It was a pact between two civilizations, one human, one alien, bound by mutual interests and a shared need for secrecy. The treaty also included provisions for ongoing cooperation between the Soviets and the Greys. The Greys would establish a hidden base within Soviet territory where they could continue their observations of Earth and work on joint projects with Soviet scientists. This base, located in a remote and secure area, would be off limits to all but the most trusted members of the Soviet leadership. The base would be equipped with the most advanced technology available, both human and alien, and would serve as the epicenter of this unprecedented alliance. The Soviets, for their part, agreed to provide the Greys with certain resources and to assist them in their endeavors on Earth. This included not only technological collaboration, but also the occasional provision of human subjects for the Greys' genetic research, an aspect of the treaty that was deeply troubling to those who were aware of it, but was accepted by Stalin as a necessary compromise. The Greys were particularly interested in the genetic diversity of humanity, and they sought to study and understand it through controlled experiments. This aspect of the treaty was kept under the strictest confidentiality, known only to a handful of Soviet officials. The signing of the treaty marked the beginning of a secretive and complex relationship between the Soviet Union and the Grey aliens. It was a relationship built on mutual benefit, but also shrouded in suspicion and fear. Both sides knew that they were dealing with forces beyond their full understanding, and both were keenly aware of the risks involved. For the Soviets, this was a chance to gain an advantage in the war and to secure their future dominance, but it was also a dangerous game, one that could have catastrophic consequences if not carefully managed. The impact on Soviet technology. In the years that followed the signing of the secret treaty with the Greys, the Soviet Union began to experience a series of remarkable technological advancements that seemed almost miraculous in their scope and scale. These developments were not merely incremental improvements on existing technologies, but rather quantum leaps that defied conventional understanding. To the outside world, it appeared as though Soviet scientists had suddenly tapped into a wellspring of unprecedented innovation, propelling the Soviet Union to the forefront of global technological prowess. New materials previously thought impossible to create began to emerge from Soviet research labs. These materials were lighter, stronger, and more durable than anything the world had seen before. They possessed qualities that seemed almost otherworldly. Metals that could withstand extreme temperatures without melting, composites that were virtually indestructible, and alloys that had a strange, almost liquid-like flexibility while retaining immense strength. Publicly, These advancements were attributed to the ingenuity and dedication of Soviet scientists and engineers, hailed as the triumph of socialism over capitalism. The truth, however, was far more complex and far more secret. Behind the closed doors of the Soviet Union's most secretive research facilities, scientists were working feverishly to reverse engineer the technology provided by the Greys. The knowledge they had received was vast and complex, far beyond the comprehension of even the most brilliant human minds. Yet, with patience, determination, and no small amount of trial and error, the Soviets began to unlock the secrets of this alien technology. The fruits of their labor would soon be seen in some of the most significant advancements of the 20th century. One of the most profound impacts of the Greys' technology was in the field of aviation. Soviet engineers, working under the strictest secrecy, began to develop aircraft that could reach unprecedented speeds and altitudes. These new aircraft incorporated advanced propulsion systems that seemed to defy the known laws of aerodynamics, allowing them to maneuver in ways that were previously thought impossible. Reports of Soviet jets performing incredible aerial feats began to circulate among Western intelligence agencies, fueling speculation and concern about the true extent of Soviet capabilities. The technology also had a profound impact on Soviet weapon systems. The development of energy weapons, devices that used focused energy beams to destroy targets, was a direct result of the knowledge shared by the Greys. These weapons, still in their experimental stages, represented a significant leap forward in military technology. While they were not yet ready for deployment, the mere fact that the Soviets were working on such advanced weaponry sent shockwaves through the intelligence communities of the West. The fear that the Soviet Union was developing weapons of mass destruction far beyond anything in the Western arsenal was very real, and it contributed to the growing paranoia and tension that would later define the Cold War. These advancements did not go unnoticed by the Soviet Union's enemies and allies alike. Western intelligence agencies began to pick up on the strange and rapid developments in Soviet technology, leading to intense speculation and concern. The sudden and unexplained progress in Soviet military technology raised alarms in Washington, London, and other Western capitals. The United States in particular became increasingly wary of Soviet capabilities, fearing that they were falling behind in the technological race. This fear would later contribute to the onset of the Cold War as the superpowers engaged in a decades-long struggle for supremacy in all areas of military and technological development. The pressure to keep up with the Soviet advances led to a surge in research and development within the United States and its allies. The space race, the arms race, and the push for nuclear superiority were all, in part, reactions to the perceived technological threat posed by the Soviet Union. While the West scrambled to understand how the Soviets had made such rapid progress, the truth about the source of this technology remained a closely guarded secret within the upper echelons of the Soviet leadership. However, despite the apparent benefits of the treaty, there were also significant challenges and dangers associated with the technology provided by the Greys. The advanced knowledge and materials given to the Soviets were not always fully understood by their scientists, leading to a number of catastrophic failures and accidents. Experimental aircraft crashed under mysterious circumstances, weapons tests ended in disaster, and entire research facilities were sometimes lost in explosions that defied explanation. These incidents were often covered up, buried under layers of bureaucratic secrecy, and the public was told that they were simply the risks of cutting-edge research. There were also growing concerns about the ethical implications of the agreement, particularly the provision of human subjects for the Greys' research. The Greys' interest in human genetics led to a series of secretive and morally questionable experiments conducted on Soviet citizens. These experiments were shrouded in secrecy, and those who participated were often unaware of the true nature of the research they were involved in. The results of these experiments were shared with the Soviet government, but the details were so disturbing that they were kept hidden, even from many within the leadership. As these concerns grew, they were largely suppressed by the Soviet leadership, who prioritized the potential benefits of the treaty over any moral or ethical considerations. Stalin, ever the pragmatist, was willing to overlook the darker aspects of the agreement as long as it continued to provide tangible benefits to the Soviet state. However, not everyone within the Soviet hierarchy was as willing to turn a blind eye. Whispers of dissent began to circulate among the more morally conscious members of the government, but in Stalin's Soviet Union, dissent was a dangerous game, and those who spoke out were quickly silenced. The consequences. The secret treaty with the Greys had profound and far-reaching consequences for the Soviet Union and the world. On one hand, it gave the Soviets a technological edge that helped them to rebuild their military might in the aftermath of World War II, positioning them as a superpower during the Cold War. The knowledge and advancements gained through the treaty played a key role in many of the Soviet Union's most significant achievements, including the development of nuclear weapons and the launch of the first artificial satellite, Sputnik, in 1957. The launch of Sputnik was more than just a symbolic victory in the space race. It was a demonstration of the Soviet Union's newfound technological prowess. The satellite's success was a direct result of the advances made possible by the treaty with the Greys. The propulsion systems and materials used in Sputnik's construction were based on technologies that had been reverse-engineered from the alien craft. The West, unaware of the true source of these advancements, was stunned by the Soviet achievement and rushed to catch up, further intensifying the Cold War rivalry. On the other hand, the treaty also sowed the seeds of distrust and paranoia that would come to define much of the Soviet Union's internal and external policies in the decades that followed. The secretive nature of the agreement, coupled with the knowledge that they were dealing with a powerful and mysterious alien race, led to an atmosphere of fear and suspicion within the Soviet leadership. Stalin, already a deeply paranoid man, became increasingly convinced that the Greys might have ulterior motives, and this fear began to permeate the Soviet government. The occasional and often disturbing demands made by the Greys, particularly regarding their genetic research and their interest in human subjects, further exacerbated these fears. The Soviet leadership found themselves in a difficult position, torn between the desire to continue benefiting from the Greys' technology and the growing concern that they had made a deal with forces they could not fully control or understand. There were also growing concerns about the long-term implications of the treaty. Some within the Soviet leadership began to question whether they had made a deal with the devil, trading their autonomy and humanity for short-term gains. The ethical and moral questions raised by the treaty, coupled with the fear that the Greys might one day turn against them, created a deep sense of unease within the Soviet government. These concerns were largely kept silent, as dissent was not tolerated under Stalin's regime. But they would continue to simmer beneath the surface, contributing to the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union in the late 20th century. The fear and paranoia that began to grip the Soviet leadership as a result of the treaty led to a series of increasingly draconian policies, both at home and abroad. The Soviet government became more secretive, more repressive, and more obsessed with controlling every aspect of life within its borders. The fear of internal dissent, coupled with the fear of external threats, led to a series of purges and crackdowns that further weakened the Soviet state. By the time the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the full extent of the secret treaty and its consequences remained hidden, known only to a few select individuals. The final betrayal. As the Cold War progressed, the relationship between the Soviet Union and the Greys became increasingly strained. What had once been a mutually beneficial alliance began to show signs of fracture as both sides grew wary of the other's true intentions. The Soviets, who had initially been eager to learn from their extraterrestrial allies, began to grow suspicious of the Greys' motives. Rumors began to circulate within the Soviet government, whispers of secret meetings between the Greys and other world powers, leading to fears that the Soviets were not the only ones who had made a pact with the aliens. The final straw came in the early 1980s, when it was discovered that the Greys had been conducting unauthorized experiments on Soviet citizens, including members of the military and government. These experiments, which were often conducted without the knowledge or consent of the subjects, led to a number of unexplained deaths and disappearances. The Soviet leadership, already paranoid and fearful, saw this as a betrayal of the highest order. The realization that they had been deceived, that the Greys had been using them for their own purposes, was a shock that shook the very foundations of the Soviet government. In response, the Soviets began to distance themselves from the Greys, shutting down joint projects and closing the secret base that had been established under the treaty. The Greys, in turn, withdrew their support, leaving the Soviets to fend for themselves. The technological advancements that had once been a source of pride for the Soviet Union now became a liability as they struggled to maintain their edge without the assistance of their extraterrestrial allies. The breakdown of the treaty marked the beginning of the end for the Soviet Union. Without the support of the Greys, the Soviets found themselves increasingly isolated and vulnerable, both domestically and internationally. The paranoia and fear that had been stoked by the secret agreement with the Greys now turned inward, leading to a series of purges and crackdowns that further weakened the Soviet state. The sense of betrayal and mistrust that had been growing within the Soviet leadership exploded into a full-blown crisis as the government began to implode under the weight of its own secrecy and repression. By the time the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the full extent of the secret treaty and its consequences remained hidden, known only to a few select individuals. The true story of the Soviet Union's relationship with the Greys was buried beneath layers of disinformation and denial, and the world was left with only fragments of the truth. The legacy of the treaty. The story of the secret treaty between the Soviet Union and the Greys is one that has been largely forgotten, buried beneath layers of secrecy and disinformation. Yet its legacy continues to shape the world we live in today. The technological advancements that were made possible by the treaty laid the groundwork for much of the modern world, from the space race to the development of advanced weapons systems. The impact of the Greys' technology can still be seen in the innovations that define our age. Technologies that, while seemingly the product of human ingenuity, owe their origins to a secretive and dangerous pact made in the darkest days of World War II. But the ethical and moral questions raised by the treaty, questions about the nature of power, the dangers of secrecy, and the limits of human ambition, remain unresolved. The story of the Soviet Grey Treaty serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the potential dangers of engaging with forces beyond our understanding. It is a story that challenges our assumptions about history and forces us to consider the possibility that the world is not as we have been led to believe. As more information continues to emerge about the secretive dealings between world governments and extraterrestrial beings, the truth about the Soviet treaty with the Greys may one day come to light. Until then, it remains a shadowy chapter in the annals of history, a story of ambition, betrayal, and the unknown forces that continue to shape our world. The legacy of that deal is still with us today, a reminder that in the quest for power and knowledge, there are always risks. And sometimes the price of those risks is far higher than we can ever foresee. In the end, the treaty with the Greys was not just a deal with an alien race, it was a deal with the unknown, a gamble on the future that would have consequences far beyond what anyone could have imagined. The world that emerged from that deal is one that is still grappling with the implications of that fateful decision, and the story of the Soviet-Grey Treaty serves as a sobering reminder of the dangers of reaching too far, too fast, into the unknown.